We're expecting President William Ruto to officially unveil Raila Odinga as put on the front page of the Standard tomorrow, man of the moment. I urge you surely to grab a copy for yourself for more insight and accurate information. All right, let's get back to the man of the moment as put right there. Let me also hear if you agree with me here in studio, Muliro, that Raila Odinga is surely the man of the moment. He has given us 8 points of his vision. He has spoken on the unity of, Africa. And we're looking at the former AU High Representative for Infrastructure, now promising to spur trade by establishing a common market, all right, and boost intra-African trade. Speak to the man of the moment tonight.
Yes, Anki, actually he's the man of the moment.
All right.
I think the former Prime Minister has something in him that when he sets on a competition, there's always excitement. And the way Kenya is doing it is even adding up to that. You can remember that, we've started so early. The president and even the prime cabinet secretary have always sought, anytime they have a congregation of African leaders, they sell their candidate. That's what the way before the unveiling. So we've seen, even I think, is it yesterday or a day ago, when the prime cabinet secretary was in Japan, again he used that opportunity to campaign for his candidate, and we are told there were almost 25 African ministers, and ministers play that quiet vote for their heads of state. So he's a man of the moment, and I think the campaign system, the way they're doing it, is unique. We've not seen that before, in the sense that we started early, and the government has come in very heavily. If you look at the Prime Cabinet Secretary has thrown his weight behind Raila Odinga.
Right.
You remember there was a time he was attending Mass, I think, in Migori or somewhere in Nyanza, and he told the people there that they are good. There's good news that I'll bring to you. That's way back. And the president has been doing this, including any summit in the country. And now, again, the unique aspect is... if, that's my word, if the leaders you've mentioned come in goodwill and honor the invitation, and we see more numbers, it will not be just the unity of the country, but we are now going with the unity of the Eastern Africa region, with the core at the heart there, the EAC, and we are looking at this so that when Raila Odinga as a candidate of Eastern Africa and Kenya speaks of African unity, we can see it from home.
All right.
Yes.
Let me hear quickly from our guests joining us virtually. And of course, like I mentioned earlier on, we are very honored to have you join us and shed more light on the current development, especially for Kenya. Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who is a former deputy chairperson, AUC. Ambassador, I'm looking at a very important document, and we are hoping that Raila Odinga, as well as Kenya, is aligned to the principles of the AU. And Raila Odinga has said he will provide leadership to ensure delivery on the priorities of the African people as envisioned in the African Union Agenda 2063. Kindly walk me and the viewer through why this Agenda 2063 is very important, especially for our candidate to align with at this point.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I fully associate myself with the remarks concerning the way Kenya has supported the candidature of Raila. And, I was watching the Olympics not too long ago, and when I would see a Kenyan win, you saw Kenyans wherever they were, they would just stand up and cheer, putting all their differences, but supporting that Kenyan. And I think this is how it should be, and I am proud to be a Kenyan and to see Kenya, really rally behind its own for this kind of job. But turning to your question, Agenda 2063 has the history to go back to when AU was established in 1963. And when AU was at 50, which was 2013, the leaders who gathered in Ethiopia to celebrate that anniversary asked themselves the road they had traveled to be there in 50 years, but they also asked themselves, are they where they should be? And the question was no. Then they asked themselves, where should we be? So Agenda 2063 gives you that ultimate goal where Africa should be in 2063. But then it also then gives you a roadmap. And that roadmap is divided into 10-year programs, which then constitute the action plan that will be implemented in each 10 years for us to arrive at 2063. And then, of course, out of those 10 years, then you have the annual and even shorter period, so that the action plan is also then now put into figures, into financial needs, and it has also then established what capacity is required in terms of human resource, in terms of capital, what kind of infrastructure needs to be put in place for Africa to achieve that rate and also be totally integrated. So really, Agenda 2063 is a roadmap, and the candidate has rightly looked at it, which is very much aware of. In fact, when he was the High Representative on Infrastructure, that is one of what is seen as, 10-year program, trying to look at issues of electricity, of roads, airports, ports, roads, and what needs to be done. So he's very much acquainted to some of the agenda, in addition to the fact that there is much more than just infrastructure. There is issue of peace and security, there is health issues,
right?
There is all that. Yes, so that is really the genesis of Agenda 2063, and that's what it stands for.
All right, quickly before I come back to Muliro here, the aspect of reducing over-reliance on external funding and rallied member states, rather Raila Odinga rallied member states and private players to finance AU priorities. This funding conversation has existed for quite some time. I mean, Africa as a continent has always, including when it comes to matters of climate action, who is polluting more than who is actually doing the positive in terms of action, has always still been a conversation. What are your comments on this particular agenda in as far as, not being over-reliant on external funding, which is also somehow crippling the continent?
If I understand you well, you are implying that the continent over-relies on external funding.
All right.
Which is true. I mean, if you look at the budgets of most African countries, if not all, none of them is able to finance 100% their budget, development and the recurrent expenditure. And so, yes, they do resort to external borrowing, whether it's from bilateral or from, development financial institutions, multilateral financial institutions, or from private lenders like Eurobond and the rest. But let me turn around and then put, for those countries which even developed, if you look at, say, Japan, US, UK, the rest, they all also borrow. No government is ever able to really raise all the resources they need for the domestic requirements, because requirements are always larger than the revenue that is available. And for Africa, in fact, I like the way sometimes President Museveni puts it, we're not really a net import of capital in terms of resources. If you think of Africa, what we export in the form of raw materials or unfinished products, and if you think of the value added out there, if Africa was doing all this here, we wouldn't be requiring that. If we stopped some of the corruption that takes place, we wouldn't be requiring a lot of funding coming from outside.
All right.
So Africa has these are some of the things that Africa should address, but just to allay to our fears that it's not because Africa is poor. Africa has not been able to, keep its resources within the continent properly, and there's leakages, and that's why Africa has to borrow. But otherwise, yes, borrowing is perhaps a norm even for developed countries.
All right. I want to come back to you, Ambassador. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation. I'm coming back to you. But we need a proper, person in office to ensure some of these things are reality. There is, Ambassador is saying it's okay to borrow, but over-reliance, according to Raila Odinga, is the problem. In fact, looking at his, being there as a candidate, let's try and look at Raila Odinga a bit. And despite losing in 5 presidential elections here at home, he has kept reinventing himself. In fact, statesmanship, Enigma, these are the names he's given in a biography written in 2006 as well. That's where the name came from. And I'm curious now to hear from you, Muliro. Do you think all these things that the ambassador is mentioning, Raila Odinga would be able to achieve following his track record in the country and now his vision for Africa? Are you confident that this particular 3 candidates we're seeing from different countries, Madagascar, Mauritius, and Djibouti, would not be a major threat to him? And if so, which of these candidates do you think might pose as a threat for Raila Odinga after especially displaying his vision for Africa?
Very good. Thank you very much. I also want to briefly, if I come to that, agree with the ambassador. He's our senior in the system, and he's right. Africa is not poor.
All right.
Beyond even other elements, there's the aspect of political will. Countries are in arrears. And the former Prime Minister is right to say, if we are going to implement what we have, the African solutions for African problems, the slogan that we have, that means we are solving our own problems in a way that we think is based on homegrown solutions. But you cannot do that if you are over-relying on external funders, because they are the people who will now determine even your solutions. So then you come back to Honorable Raila Odinga, and you'll see that he's actually the person, by nature of his politics. AU now requires to be fired up. AU requires to be excited. AU requires to be taken back to the hands of the Africans themselves. There's something like, we say the ripple effect.
All right.
It's like from the drop in water, near the source, there's strength. So the AU is like that. When you're moving away from Addis, you come, it fades, and you find that the African people themselves cannot put a finger on what the AU can do for them. So the AU first requires a person of Raila's caliber to fire it up, bring it into the people. And that's why I think he's getting every opportunity, whether it is a cultural opportunity, and he's addressing Africa. And he should continue like that. In fact, apart from that very technocratic vision, let him just simplify his address to African people. Talk about the simplest things like hunger, like flooding, things that affect the common, as they say, the bottom person in Africa.
All right.
And I think in matters of how the AU works, remember, Anki, there have been reports on reforms. And Honorable Raila Odinga was there during the idea of High Representative for Infrastructure. These reports are there. He doesn't need to go back and reinvent the wheel. What is lacking in the AU is now implementation of all this, turning even the sloganeering, like silencing the guns, African solutions for African problems.
All right.
This time around, the theme is about training an African, educating an African fit for the 21st century. So turn that into action. And I think with the excitement, it just requires a fired up person, the arrowhead of the AU, and that is the chair of the AUC. And we are seeing that. Kenya has set the tempo.
Okay.
And I think even by nature, going back, by nature of the person in charge of the foreign affairs, the way we have seen progressively twice the former prime minister as a candidate meeting the prime cabinet secretary and minister for cabinet secretary for foreign affairs and addressing the world and Kenyans. So I think, in my view, apart from, we may say when he gets there and he'll find that maybe the bed is different from what he's saying in campaigns, but he's not a new person on African issues. He has actually really articulated them, even when he was not a candidate for the AUC chair person.
Interesting. Let's go back to Ambassador, because having had Kenyan serve as former deputy chairperson AUC, I think it came with some benefits. Let me go back to the layman's question so that other Kenyans also understand why it's very important that we get our campaigning right, and also the support behind Raila Odinga. Ambassador, what would it mean for us if Raila Odinga did clinch or does clinch this particular seat at this point in time, 2025?
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to agree with my fellow panelists, what he has said. And you did ask a question about the other competitors. I happen to know all of them. In my previous incarnation, I worked all three very closely. And so they're solid candidates, but of course, I see, Raila as having a slight edge that he's been prime minister. He's also very well known in the continent, but you never underrate anybody until it is done. Now, the question that you ask is important. What does that win mean? Of course, any country in what you might call soft power is always good to have one of their own lead an international organization, such as the African Union, but also even to host such organizations. If you look at, for instance, the UN system, the AU and other organizations, countries tend to really support their candidate because it really puts the country on the map. And of course, that is part of really what you might call soft power. But of course, also from the African Union, we are also looking for a suitable candidate. It's not simply a Kenyan issue. This is a continent. Who's fit for the job to do that kind of job? And when you look at what the job description entails, I think that is, to me, a bigger consideration too. And that's what I would go for. And so what it means for Kenya, of course, is, as I was saying early on, it's a pride of the country, but also, offering the best that Kenya would be able to have.
It would come as simple as it comes right now, Ambassador. Is Africa united? Are we any close to the dream of the Pan-Africanism this far? Are we united? Are we close to it?
No, if we were united, it is a work in progress. We've come a long way, but we still have a long, long way to go. And I'm not naive to the fact that there are challenges.
Right.
There are going to be, huge mountains to climb ahead before we get to where our destination is. But I think, to me, it's not, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the step that you take. If you look at what is happening in the continent, Africa is coming of age, and Africa now realizes that the world out there is not going to come to Africa's aid. You are mentioning about food security. You are mentioning about these pandemics we are having. You are mentioning about the low level of trade that is taking place between African countries. So many. And if you look at the rest of the world, for instance, in Europe, they trade within each other about 60% and all that. And if Africa is going to tackle the poverty that we have, the unemployment that we have, the underdevelopment that we have no choice.
All right.
So it's not something nice to do. It is a necessity for Africa. And so I see this as a must do. But of course, it takes time to get people on board to understand. And implementation is not taken by the African Union. all this is implemented at national level, even at county level, because if you talk of like the theme you mentioned, it's not implemented the African Union. African Union only brings the countries together, agree on the action plan. Then there is a part of African Union to do, but the rest of it, I would say over 90%, is implemented at the national level.
Thank you.
So that is really something that we should understand.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, former Deputy Chairperson, AUC. I would be, we need to end, but I will not be very happy if I end without appreciating you. Nasongo Muliro, who is a foreign policy and security specialist. What would be your closing remarks to this, very briefly, perhaps in 30 seconds?
For me, in closing, I'll say this, that Kenya needs first to organize these campaigns very well in terms of coordination between the campaign team of the candidate and the government. The government should take charge, in fact, harmonize all the roadmaps. And then next, we should be able to use our infrastructure. We have that edge that we have more missions in Africa, almost over 20, but then our competitors, like for instance, if we took, for example, Djibouti has less than 10. So, and the infrastructure of your missions is also very important in galvanizing what the ambassador talked about, the chemistry and all, introducing yourself to the candidate. So, for me, I think this, as they say, it's not just for the candidate, it's not just for Kenya, it's not just for East Africa, but for Africa.
Right.
Yes, and therefore I think our candidate must wear the coat of Pan-Africanism.
Thank you very much, and of course, let's also appreciate that you got the memo. Black is the color tonight. Nasongo Muliro, foreign policy and security specialist, and also who has joined us live virtually all the way from Karen in Nairobi, is Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who served as former deputy chairperson AUC. Now, Africa is not just a place. It is an emotion, a state of being where the rhythm of life beats in harmony with the pulse of the wild. Beautiful quote right there. That's the best way to end. And we asked you a very important question. You have been speaking with us on the BQ today, and as far as NYS is concerned, and allow me to just pick one feedback from Twitter. Kim saying, of course, that is the big question. Do you think it's a good idea to offer basic firearm lesson to NYS rookies? Kims, thank you for speaking with us, saying, no, it's not. In my view, it's not to give a paramilitary training to youths without guaranteed employment after the training. In fact, he's saying in Kiswahili, allow me, in honor of his respect, or to respect him, huo ujuzi wa kutumia silaha watatumia kwa uhalifu. Wow. That's it. Thank you very much for being part of this broadcast tonight. Keep it KTN, and remember to grab a copy of the Bold Newspaper Standard. Damian Evans has been on sign language. My name is Anki Doris Sombat. Have a good night.